Welcome back to the Investigative Journal. My name is tomfriess. I'm guest hosting for Greg Szymanski, who is going to join me at the second half of the broadcast. We're beginning the second hour. Greg, are you with us?
Yeah, I'm here. Nice to be on my own. I thought I'd call my own show up. It's a first-time event. Go ahead.
Well,
I don't want to. Yeah, I don't want to interrupt you, but go ahead.
I've got the distinct pleasure of being able to interview Greg Szymanski on his own show.
Yeah, it should be fun. I just got off an interview on WCER. That's an AM station in Canton, Ohio. Quite an interesting station. These guys really talk. The show's American Prophecy, and Bruce Wilson's one of the hosts, and they remind me of the old Protestant people. They're very strong Bible believers and are much against worshiping on Sunday and believe in Luther, Calvin, and the rest of the people. So it was an interesting show on a station that has a lineup like Alex Jones, Tex Mars, and Dr. Laura, and some others. So it's interesting. But we did tell the truth, and I got a few things out in 45 minutes, so it was worth it.
Well, congratulations. I'm glad you got the opportunity. Is this your first contact with them?
Yeah, first time I was on their show, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure they'll probably have you back.
Yeah, they said they'll call me back, and I said I'd love to, and gave a little plug to my show.
Yeah. Well, we told the listeners where you were, and they all are sorry that you weren't here. But I've kept them very busy while you were gone, as you might imagine. And I got permission from Nick from remnantofgod.org to tell your listeners about the truth about the apostolic succession of the Roman Catholic Church.
Wow.
That they truly do not have apostolic succession, and that Peter the Apostle was not the original Pope of Rome. He was never in Rome, as a matter of fact, and we proved it by the written Word of God, by the Scriptures themselves, made it virtually impossible the Apostle Peter to be in Rome at the time that the Roman Catholic hierarchy claims that he came and established the Christian Church and became the first bishop of Rome.
Wow.
Scripturally, it is impossible. What do you think about that?
That's a big story, and I know Nick Rivera. I've always enjoyed listening and learning from him. So yeah, did you get that out in the first hour, or do you want to continue? Go ahead.
Well, we were heavy into it, and I told your listeners where they could get the rest of the information if you wanted to move on to other things.
Sure, whatever's
really
on your...
It's your show.
Well, you're the host, so whatever you'd like to ask me or do, go right ahead.
Okay. Well, I don't know what to do. I want to hear what you have to say. First of all, I've been dying to hear from you. It's probably too early to ask you this. I know this is something that you've just initiated. But I'm going to ask it anyway. How are you coming with the Freedom of Information Act request for the Lincoln documents? Can you update us on that? You and Chris Strunk are working on that, aren't you?
Yeah, he sent it out, and that was about a week ago, so we haven't heard anything. But I think it's really something that needs to be told. First of all, let me say that there's enough documentation now to make a case of what we're talking about, the Jesuits being involved in the Lincoln assassination and their cover-up. But I think this will add to it, and to see what our government says about this. And so we'll see, but no word yet. But that is a great, I was just looking here at some of the things in history regarding that time, and Samuel Morse wrote a book that I'd like people to get called Conspiracies Against the Liberties of the United States, written by the inventor of the Morse Code, who spent time in Italy talking with ecclesiastics from Rome, and he was led to believe that their main goal was, under a religious mission, to bring a downfall to the United States, even back then. And that might be something interesting, because I've talked about it before. But
well, I know you have, and I've talked about it too as well. I think you certainly know, and many of your listeners know that I'm an amateur radio operator, and I've taken this message to amateur radio. And,
right.
of course, to draw the ear of amateurs about the Vatican conspiracy to overthrow this Protestant constitutional republic, I use Samuel Morse as an authority, because he wrote a book about it. And that draws the amateurs' attention, and they listen more closely, because many of the sources that I cite they're not familiar with, but they certainly are familiar with Samuel F.B. Morse, who wrote the book. But
and his main
I'll tell you what, I'm really looking forward to finding out what it was that the government archives have held in secret since Lincoln's assassination. That, to me,
why would they?
You know, think about volumes, don't you think?
Yeah, and who are they trying to protect? I mean, if it's any one person, any one individual, he'd have long been dead. So it has to be an institution, and we know through history that the Patriots during that time, Samuel Morse included, broke off diplomatic relations with the Vatican after the Lincoln assassination for this very reason, because they were involved in killing him, and they even were caught hiding one of the killers out, John Surratt, one of the hit team, in Rome. And that's a fact. And then they came back for a trial. So all this stuff is fact. I'm interested in seeing what the government's been hiding for so long, and will they ever release it? Because the real key to this thing is they've never changed. I mean, the Vatican is still controlling our government, even more today than they were back then. And they're controlling our military leaders have all been trained, most of them, the major ones, at Georgetown or Georgetown affiliated. So we have a serious problem, folks, and we are being basically manipulated, like I always mention on this show, basically manipulated and kept from the truth in so many different areas. And it isn't Catholic bashing to start saying these things, and that's how they hide. They've been hiding behind God and Jesus too long.
Well, absolutely.
And Luther knew it, Calvin knew it, and many of the Protestant protesters knew it. And what they've done now is they have completely eliminated any kind of true protest, and they have made the Protestant Church just an arm of Catholicism.
Right.
And all you got to do is ask your minister on Sunday, ask him about the Antichrist theory and what the Bible says about it, and see what he says. And ask him if he will do a sermon on the papacy being the Antichrist. And that's an interesting subject. I bet you they won't.
Well, I take an even more aggressive approach. I tell people on amateur radio, you walk into your church Sunday morning and you ask the pastor flat out, in the middle of the service, who is the Antichrist? And if he can't tell you, pitch his fanny to the curb, because this information is known by those people. They're not passing it on to the laity of the Protestant churches. Listen, it's obvious to me through the research that I've done that this information is purposely hidden so as to achieve some kind of level of peace and harmony between the protesters and the whore of Rome.
Right.
And listen, the reason Abraham Lincoln didn't say so much, we know that he said plenty, but he didn't bring this out into the public discourse that the Jesuits were involved in the Civil War, and also he predicted that they would be his assassins, and that wasn't widely talked about simply because we were coming out of the first Civil War, and he knew that information, if it ever got widely known, would launch us directly into the Second Civil War.
Right.
And listen, what really gets me, you know as well as I do, that they protected these Lincoln documents for so long to protect somebody. Okay? But that somebody that they're trying to protect is more in control of our government now than they ever were. And it really tells me something. I don't know if it struck you or not. They don't care.
Oh, exactly. It's not only government, it is the media. We see it at all levels, the mainstream, the alternative. We see it in most every aspect of our life, or the religious aspect, and people have forgotten history, and that's what they want you to do. Let me just read you 3 paragraphs from a book it's called 50 Years in the Church of Rome by Father Charles Chiniquy.
Great.
And Father Chiniquy knew Abraham Lincoln and was represented by him when Father Chiniquy rebelled against the Catholic Church in Illinois. He was framed by the Jesuits for rape. He hired at this time a young lawyer named Abraham Lincoln, who put on the stand so many, he first of all got Chiniquy off the charge, and during that trial, many people were forced to testify about the true motives of the Catholic Church and their doctrine and the Jesuits. And that's where Lincoln started to understand exactly what the church was doing, and that's who killed him. And Father Chiniquy, for years, had stated that Lincoln was killed for these reasons. His documents were kept in a house in Illinois that was burned down by the Vatican, but he kept copies of every document he had, and he left them with his surviving relatives in Canada. These were uncovered in 1990, or just recently, not too long ago, by a writer named C.T. Wilcox, who met the last surviving member of the Chiniquy family, who gave him personal letters Lincoln wrote about the Vatican and the Jesuits and how evil they were, and the Vatican never knew they existed. He asked this woman, who was in her 80s or 90s when she finally passed away, why she was giving them up, and she said, I kept them a secret because I thought they would kill me, or I knew they would try to kill me if they knew they were existence. He wrote the book Transformation of America, which is out now. He's a Canadian who's trying to help Americans understand what's going on, and it's just devastating. But in Chiniquy's book, he says this, and it's really important to listen to a few things. He says, he quotes a Spanish orator named Castelar, and Castelar was speaking of his own Church of Rome in 1869, and he said, quote, there is not a single progressive principle that has not been cursed by the Catholic Church. This is true of England and Germany as well as of Catholic countries. The Church cursed the French Revolution, the Belgian Constitution, and Italian independence. Not a constitution has been born, not a step of progress made, not a solitary reform effected, which has not been under the terrific persecution of the Church. But Chiniquy asks, why ask the testimony of Protestants or liberals to warn the American people against the conspiracy the Catholic Church has against your country, when all we have to do is look at public testimony of all bishops and priests to prove it? With the most daring impudence, the Church of Rome, through her leading men, is boasting of her stern determination to destroy all the rights and privileges which have cost so much blood to this American people. Let the Americans who have eyes to see and intelligence to understand read the following unimpeachable documents and judge for themselves of what will become of this country if Rome is allowed to grow strong enough to execute its threats. The Church of, and he says this, the Church says, the Church is of necessity intolerant of heresy. Heresy she endures when and where she must, but she hates it and directs all her energies to destroy it. If Catholics ever gain a sufficient numerical majority in this country, religious freedom is at an end. So our enemies say, so we believe. Quote, no man has a right to choose his religion. Catholicism is the most intolerant of creeds. It is intolerance itself. We might as rationally maintain that 2 and 2 does not make 4 as the theory of religious liberty. And I'll tell you what, the Church, he says this, the Church is instituted as every Catholic who understands his religious beliefs to guard and defend the right of God against any and every enemy at all times and all places. But what I might add is when they say God, they mean Lucifer. And that's what they learn at the higher levels. Right. And so that's what we have, a group of people who have taken over a religion, made it into a country, affected your foreign and domestic policy by infiltrating with your government leaders, and they say God when they mean the devil. And it's that simple. And I think yesterday's interview with John Daniel tried to bring that out, exactly how this country was founded on false principles, even though the Constitution on its face is important and good, but the men behind the scenes had other intentions for this country, as Daniel researched, and that came out in Catholic documents. Interesting, isn't it, Tom?
Well, absolutely. That interview with Daniels was spellbinding last night, and I caught him when he got, just as he got off the program. I called him and talked to him for 45 minutes.
Oh, he's a great guy.
That guy's incredible. And I mean, he knows the truth, and he knows what we've been researching and coming up with on our own. It was just like, when I talked to him, it was like reading my own mind.
Mm-hmm.
He's really up on it, and I can't wait to get his book, Vatican Design Exposed. And I'm going to get all the information from him. But I'm so thankful that you got him on the program and had that great interview with him. I hope he comes back, because he's got plenty more to say. Trust me, because he kept me busy for 45 minutes after the program last night. Of course, I sent in several questions that I wanted you to ask him, and the interview was going so good, I hated for you to interrupt to ask the question, so I asked him myself.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't. You got to send me when you email me. I got to give you my other email, because I don't look at that one you sent. I got a few emails, different emails, and the one for the show I use is different, so I'll give that to you later.
Yeah, okay.
But you know, a lot of these, for example, Chiniquy's testimony and Abraham Lincoln's warnings, along with Samuel Morse, and the ending of the diplomatic relations with the Vatican back then was a sign. They were warning Americans, if they ever get more control of your country, forget about it. And that's exactly what's happening today.
Right. Exactly.
Their program never changes.
And you know, when they're in a minority, they're a fox. When they're your equal, they're more aggressive. But when they're in the majority, they're the lion. This intolerance that you talked about earlier, it's rooted in what we were talking about in the first hour. That their religion is based on apostolic succession, and that the Apostle Peter was the first pope, and by that they claim to be the successors of Peter with all the authority of Christ himself. That's why he's called the Vicar of Christ, which means the replacement of the Son of God.
Right.
Now that doesn't seem, that seems outrageous enough on its own, but when you realize they truly believe that he is the replacement of the Son of God. And what power should the Vatican have? No opposition.
Right.
Complete control over ecclesiastical things and complete sovereignty over temporal things. And
right.
I've said to you and your audience before, that is all things, man. They claim by divine right, as being the successors of the Apostle Peter, all of the authority of Christ on earth. And no man has the freedom of religion, and no man has the freedom of speech, and no man has the freedom of press. Everything is dictated from Rome. Nobody has the right to keep and bear arms. Nobody has the right to freedom of assembly. Nobody has the right to suggest that the governments of the world should maintain a solid wall between the church and the state, because Rome is based on the kingdom of God, where it's a theocracy, where there's no division between church and state. Listen, the only successful union of church and state in the history of this earth will be when Christ comes to set up his kingdom. And every attempt of man to govern himself without that wall of separation between church and state is going to be a miserable failure, and Catholicism has proved it for nearly 2,000 years.
Now, I'm going to read something that you could probably read today, and this will explain why the media is kept silent, why Alex Jones protects the Vatican, why. And they said, Father Chiniquy said this about Samuel Morse back during their Civil War times. And it exists today, folks. It's the same thing. And they said this. He said that if the truth were known, and if the Protestants of both the North and the South would surely unite to exterminate the priests and the Jesuits, if they could hear what Professor Morse has said to me of the plots made in the very city of Rome to destroy this republic, and if they could learn how the priests, the nuns, and the monks which daily land on our shores under the pretext of preaching their religion, instructing the people in their schools, taking care of the sick in the hospitals, are nothing else but the emissaries of the Pope, of Napoleon, and other despots of Europe to undermine our institutions, alienate the hearts of our people from our Constitution and our laws, destroy our schools, and prepare a reign of anarchy here, as they have done in Ireland, in Mexico, in Spain, and wherever there are any people who want to be free. Doesn't that could be said today, Tom?
Well, absolutely. It certainly could.
But you know what? You got people in the media saying, "Oh, this is twisted. Don't listen to Abraham Lincoln and Samuel Morse. They don't know what they're talking about." Believe people like Alex Jones and Jeff Brents, folks. Yes, sure. You know, when I start really thinking about it, I start to really understand their control. And it gets me very upset because there are so many good people that are being misled. And that's why these guys need to be exposed. Do you agree?
Well, absolutely I agree. Listen, I have to admit to you, I've never been an avid listener of Alex Jones except for the last maybe 6 months or so. And I'd heard about his covering up for the Jesuits, possibly even being a shill for the Jesuits in the Catholic Church, and I wanted to hear it for myself.
Right.
And I listened to several of these programs, and I was looking for signs. And while I didn't want to admit it, since he's so brave in going out and to expose the government's hand in 9/11 and all the other conspiracies that are well documented, irrefutable evidence.
Of course.
Put it that way. It's irrefutable evidence. But he won't talk about this. Now, I first gave him an excuse, because to do this, listen, I suffered tremendous persecution for talking about this stuff on amateur radio. I don't have to tell you. You know. And so does Nick from remnantofgod.org. And so does Thomas Richards from spirituallysmart.com. And I'm certain that Richard Bennett from BereanBeacon.org suffer the same kinds of persecution. So at first I gave Alex Jones a pass because he doesn't want to inflame his audience with the same kind of flame that I'm subjected to. But now I've become to realize what the stakes are. And this subject just cannot be avoided anymore. And those who continue to avoid this subject have to be looked at with a very critical eye. And I'm starting to see what you and Eric John Phelps and Thomas Richards are beginning to say about Alex Jones. And I got to tell you, I don't want to go there, but I can't help it.
Well, the point is, I'll be honest with you. You know, when you start looking at 9/11, and I can remember researching it myself and coming up with a lot of evidence. I mean, if you go back to some of my old stories, that was one of the reasons why I was on his show all the time, because I came up with some evidence that was very good. And my main concern was to look at that case and to show and to either disprove or prove the government story by eyewitnesses, by evidence, and looking at it from more or less like a lawyer, like an investigator would look at the case, and then writing about it as a journalist. Well, my stories were quite appealing and were very, very sought after by the American free press and this so-called alternative media, because I came from the mainstream media, so my main concern was to try to get these stories printed there, which I knew they wouldn't do, and I even contacted some of my former sources that I used to work with, and they don't touch 9/11 at all. So I had to go to the alternative media.
Right.
And I was treated like a king by these guys until I told them, you know, I used to work in Rome, and I remember starting this story, and it always stuck in the back of my mind, the things I learned there. And I said, you know what, I want to see if there's any Americans who understand this story about Rome, about Father Marcinkus, all these people that I knew there that were crooks, the Archbishop from Chicago, the head of the Vatican Bank. I saw the papers come out about the 150 high-level priests that were 33-degree Freemasons or above. I saw the connections between the CIA, the mob, the Red Brigade, how they fostered terrorism, how the Vatican was connected, but never thought America would get to that point. Because I felt back then as a kid, God, we got a country that can fight these people, and I didn't understand it. So when I started looking at it here, I began to research it through people like Eric and others that have taken up this cause, that knew a lot more about it than I did, a lot more biblical stories about them. You know, I looked at it from both a biblical and a secular point of view. And so when I began to do that, began to cover that story, every one of these guys cut me off, would not talk to me, and in fact began to spread bad rumors about me, that I was a Mossad agent, that I was this, that I was that I was stealing their advertising.
Well, that's their modus operandi.
Yeah.
When they have an enemy that's outspoken, that they can't refute the facts, they just slaughter you in the press. That's what they did to Alberto Rivera. That's what they do to everybody that steps out and reveals the truth about the Vatican. You're not going to be any exception to that. Neither am I.
So that's why I say these guys are involved, because I know how they treated me.
Sure.
And that's one reason. But then I saw their complete cover-up of the truth of these facts, connecting the dots between, like John Daniel said, the New World Order is the Vatican, and the Vatican is the New World Order, folks.
Exactly.
That's it.
They're just different names to describe the Vatican.
And if they can't see this through history, if they refuse to cover it and then confuse you with all this other garbage, then you know they are really either they're being paid to shut up, or they are covering for them for a reason, and that reason has to be one of keeping the people at bay until this until this New World Order takes over, and they then will be rewarded. That's the only way I can think about it.
I'm telling you, buddy, the Holy Roman Inquisition is coming to America just as sure as I'm sitting here. You know, we read Fox's Book of Martyrs and thinking, wow, that's way back in the past when nobody had an education and they thought to solve their problems was to kill people.
Right.
That has never changed. That's what the Council of Trent was all about. It was the Counter-Reformation, the way to destroy Protestant America. That's why the Jesuits were created in the first place. I see we're
I'm going to let you do the intro. I'm going to let you do the break, so go ahead.
Okay. This is Greg Szymanski's Investigative Journal, and I'm your guest host, Tom Fress, and I'm interviewing the man that runs this program. So stay tuned. Maybe we'll come up with something really interesting. No doubt we will, because this subject is endless. Welcome back to the second half of Greg Szymanski's program, Investigative Journal. I'm your guest host this evening. My name is Tom Fress. Guess who I have on the line? None other than Greg Szymanski himself. Welcome after the break. Now, let's continue with our discussion about the papacy and how she's...
Yeah, I wanted to mention that I spent the first hour of my show on another station being interviewed, WCER AM 900 in Canton, Ohio. And I want to thank Bruce Wilson and the American Prophecy Show there for allowing this message to come across, the message that needs to be told. But let me say this, Tom. I want to thank you, too, for spreading this message on amateur radio like you do all the time. I know you're quite dedicated, and I want you to know that in any way that I can help you get this message across in other markets, anywhere, I will do that, because you're a delight to listen to, and I think your voice is really needed at this hour. So anything I can do off the air to help you, let me know. But let me say this. When we're talking about getting the truth about Abraham Lincoln across, Americans have to understand that what's going on today is what went on during our Civil War. Nothing has ever changed. They want you to believe that. They want to hide history from you. But let me read something that's so devastating, and maybe it'll make you just think about the Vatican if you don't really think these guys are involved in our government today. But listen to what Abraham Lincoln, who I think was one of the more honorable presidents that our country has ever had, who was killed by them, Listen to what Father Chiniquy said one night when he had, and what Abraham Lincoln said one night at a conversation during the Civil War they had. And Father Chiniquy said this. He said, when I was asked to come over and see the President, I arrived at the mansion door. He invited me to go with him into his study, and he said, well, you thought I was very busy, didn't you, Father Chiniquy? I must rest an hour with you. I'm in need of that rest. My head is aching. I feel as crushed under the burden on affairs which are on my shoulders. There are many important things about the plots of the Jesuits that I can learn only from you, Father. Please wait just a moment. I have just received some dispatches from General Grant, to which I must give an answer. My secretary is waiting for me. I must go to him right now, but please amuse yourself with those books during my short absence. 25 minutes later, Father Chiniquy says the President had returned with his face flushed with joy. Glorious news, Father. General Grant has again beaten Lee and forced him to retreat towards Richmond, when he will have to surrender before long. Grant is a real hero. But let us come to the question I want to put to you. Have you read the letter of the Pope to Jefferson Davis? Or what do you think of it? My dear President, I answered, it is just that letter which brought me to your presence again, the day before yesterday. I wanted to come and see you from the very day I read it, but I knew you were so overwhelmed with the affairs of your government that I would not be able to see you. However, the anxieties of my mind were so that I determined to go over every barrier to warn you against the new dangers and plots which I knew would come out of the perfidious letter against your life. This letter from the Pope is a poison arrow thrown by the Pope at you personally, and it will be more than a miracle if it be not your irrevocable warrant of death. Before reading it, it is true that every Catholic could see by the bishops siding with the rebel cause that their church as a whole was against this free Republican government. However, a good number of liberty-loving Irish, German, and French Catholics, following more the instincts of their noble nature than the degrading principles of the church, enrolled themselves under the banners of liberty, and they have fought like heroes to detach these men from the rank and file of the northern armies and force them to help the cause of the rebellion, because the object of the intrigues of the Jesuits. Secret and pressing letters were addressed from Rome to the bishops, ordering them to weaken your armies by detaching those men from you. The bishops answered that they could not do that without exposing themselves to be shot, but they advised the Pope to acknowledge at once the legitimacy of the Southern Republic and to take Jeff Davis under the supreme protection by a letter which would be read everywhere. And it goes on. But can you see, Tom, and I hope the listeners understand, that these are important facts that have been hidden. And the Church's goal, and the Vatican and the Jesuit goal, has not changed now. They're a lot slicker now. They seem to be doing a lot of great things, but it isn't so. And just like they tried to bring our republic down then, they're doing it now in a different way. And I want to get your opinions, too, about it. Because isn't it devastating, these things that are just hidden from people?
Well, absolutely. Charles Chiniquy brings this out, and the name escapes me right now. John Daniels talks about this in his book. The Enemy Unmasked and the Secret Terrorists by Bill Hughes brings all this information out. My history books, my high school history books, said nothing about the papacy interjecting itself during the Civil War. And that letter to Davis was nothing but a signal to the Catholics in the North to diminish their loyalties to the North.
Exactly.
The North
like
heavily Catholic. The South was primarily Protestant. And when that letter surfaced in Jefferson's hands, having come from the Pope, that had a message, an unspoken message to the loyal Catholics in the North. And that put the whole war effort in jeopardy. And it was an intentional effort on the Vatican's part to diminish the power of the North, and to see to it that the South succeeded in seceding from the Union, so so that the papacy could divide and conquer. My history book said nothing about the Jesuit slave traders who went to Africa and bought up all the slaves and put them on the I guess they were Muslim slave traders, bought them up and sold them to the Jesuit black trading ships that brought the slaves to this country. They literally had both sides of the dialectic, as they always do. They created the problem by selling slaves to the South in violation of our Constitution, declaring that man is equal in the sight of God, and that pitted the South against the very Constitution under which they were incorporated.
Right. And listen to what Lincoln says to Chiniquy regarding his statements. And I didn't read all of Chiniquy's statements, but he says, "You confirm me," and this is Lincoln speaking, "in the views I had taken of the letter of the Pope. Professor Morse is of the same mind with you. It is indeed the most perfidious act which could occur under present circumstances. You are perfectly correct when you say that it was to detach the Roman Catholics who had enrolled themselves in our armies. Since the publication of that letter, a great number of them have deserted their banners and turned traitors. Very few, comparatively, have remained true to their oath of fidelity. It is, however, very lucky that one of those few, Sheridan, is worth a whole army by his ability, his patriotism, and his heroic courage. It is true also that Meade had remained with us and gained the bloody Battle of Gettysburg, but how could he lose it when he was surrounded by such heroes as Howard, Reynolds, Buford, Wadsworth, Cutler, Slocum, Six, Hancock, Barnes, etc.? But it is evident that his Romanism superseded his patriotism after the battle. He let the army of Lee escape when it was so easy to cut his retreat and force him to surrender after having lost nearly half of the soldiers in the last 3 days' carnage. When Meade was ordered the pursuit after the battle, a stranger came in haste to the headquarters, and that stranger was a disguised Jesuit. After a 10-minute conversation with him, Meade made such arrangements for the pursuit of the enemy that he escaped almost untouched, with the loss of only 2 guns. And you know, here we have the Jesuits, Lincoln talking about it, talking about a man being a traitor to his country and Romanism superseding his patriotism, a Jesuit intervening in the battles. And the same thing is going on now. Romanism has taken over in our government, and every one of them, Ron Paul, the rest of them, are involved in Romanism, not patriotism, folks. And just as they allowed Lee to escape, they're going to let they are going to allow this country to go lose the battle of freedom unless we understand the Jesuit order and the Vatican's role in this and call these people to task, like Lincoln did, or tried to do. And because of his patriotism, he was killed by them. And that letter from the Pope was his death warrant. So anyway, go ahead.
Well,
Tom,
that's absolutely right. And I'll tell you what, God's people today need to take a lesson from President Lincoln. He realized the spiritual battle that was waging in the United States. It wasn't just the North versus the South. This was a religious war. And
bet it was.
He prayed, got on his knees, and he prayed to God for divine intervention. He realized what was at stake: a free Protestant constitutional republic versus a papal dictatorship. And what did he resort to? Prayer. And that's exactly how we're going to defeat this beast, if it's at all possible. Personally, I got to tell you the truth. I don't want to disappoint you, but I got to tell you the truth. Prophecy doesn't indicate that that's going to happen.
Yeah, and I agree with you.
Prophecy indicates that we're going all the way with this. There's no salvation for the United States. So I teach people on amateur radio, get your life right with Christ, because the Great Tribulation has begun. The persecution is coming. Don't wait. Don't wait. Make your peace with God. Read the Scriptures. Divorce yourself from the system of Rome. Divorce yourself from the beast of Rome and the false Roman Catholic Church and the apostate ecumenical Protestant churches. Comply with God's command. In Revelation chapter 18, verse 4, come out of her, my people, that ye partake not of her sins, so that you receive not of her plagues, because God is going to judge the great whore of Rome. It's talked about in Revelation 17 and 18, and there's no stopping it. This is divine. This is a fulfillment of divine Bible prophecy. And
right.
I just don't see America repenting and kicking the Jesuits and the Vatican influence out of this country. I believe this is the great apostasy. This is what the Bible has predicted. This is the culmination of all the ages. And I know that goes against what you want. My natural desire as a flesh and blood man is the same as yours. We've got to fight this fight. But listen, buddy, I know you don't want to hear this, but I firmly believe that this is God's fight. We can't whip this monster.
No, and people ask me, Greg, what do you think you're going to do with this? Are you going to? And my goal was always was never to look at the end result, but to look at the means of what's happening now. And I don't subscribe to the Jesuit theory. The end justifies the means, because the end is only in God's hands, not ours. But we have a responsibility to look at history of our country, to understand what's going on, both on the political agendas and also the religious agendas of these people, and to expose them. Absolutely. And let the chips fall where they may.
Right.
And my feeling is that the final arbiter is God himself.
Well, I'm like you. We've got to throw caution to the wind, and we've got to let God's people in this country know what is going on so that they know what the remedy is. And the remedy is the salvation of Christ Almighty. None of us are given more than 70 years anyway. Salvation should be on the lips of every Christian man and woman in this country every day, all day long. But now we're seeing the fulfillment of the very culmination of the consummation of the ages, is what the Bible calls it. And this is the great battle between Satan and Christ over this earth and over God's people. And whatever happens to the United States, really, as difficult as it is to say and as difficult as it is to hear, is inconsequential to eternity. And that's what I talk about on the radio. I talk about everything that you talk about on the Investigative Journal, and everything that Eric John Phelps talks about, and everything that Bill Hughes talks about, and Greg and Thomas Richards, and all the greats in this fight. I talk about everything you talk about, but I punctuate it with this. Now you know. It's the end time. It's time to get on your knees and take this gospel seriously. It's a matter of life and death now. And everybody can see it. Even the secular world can see what's going on. And
people shake their heads.
It's not just the Jesus freaks anymore. It's the secular world that says, hey, maybe there really is something to this Bible. Maybe the book of Revelation really is something we ought to pay attention to. I've heard it come out of the mouths of heathen on amateur radio.
And let's be clear about the Jesuits. They want to give anybody who has a belief in the Bible a bad name. They'll call you all these crazy born-again Christians, these fundamentalists, and they love that. Because you see, anything that has a firm credibility, or anybody who has a firm belief in something against what they're doing. Now, you see, I take a position like this so I can really explain it to others who may still believe that people who read the Bible are, weird and crazy, and that's what they've wanted people to think. But here's the thought. Look at it from their point of view. When you know that when they are worshiping Lucifer, whether you believe in Lucifer and the devil and God and Jesus as the Bible says it, think about what they believe. And what they believe is that they need to hide behind this figure of God and Jesus to get their end, to reach their end, which is a Luciferian end that they believe in. So even if you don't, folks, believe in these stories that we're telling you and the truth in the Bible, what side would you rather be on? The side of evil? What they were even doing back in the Civil War? Or would you want to be on the side of Abraham Lincoln, who stood for freedom in its truest sense? Well, I think you'd choose him.
Absolutely. Let me punctuate with what you just said with a passage of the Scripture.
Right.
I believe it's Matthew 24. The apostles came to him and said, Jesus, tell us what's the sign of the end and the sign of thy coming and the end of the world. And the first words out of Jesus' mouth was this: see that no man deceive you. And that deception is, you just talked about it. It's this esoteric hiding behind the formal Christianity that the lay people in the Catholic Church see on the face of Catholicity, but behind the scenes, the hierarchies are Luciferian.
Yeah,
straight.
Exactly.
I mean, and that's the deception that Jesus was talking about. See that no man deceive you. That was the defining characteristic of these last days, is deception. And that deception is embodied in this esoteric division in the Roman Catholic Church, and right now all of Christianity, both Protestant and Catholic, is the esoteric hierarchy who worship Satan, while those in the laity are considered the Goya, the cattle, and are left to believe the charade that's put out front, which is the true Christianity.
Right.
This is something that just totally escapes anybody that hasn't done the research.
Exactly, and that's what they want.
It sounds to Catholics and other people that we're Catholic bashing to suggest that the Roman Catholic hierarchy are Luciferian. But it's not Catholic bashing at all. It's well substantiated fact. Father Malachi Martin wrote several books about open Satanism being practiced in the Vatican. Leo Zagami talks about it. Everybody talks about it that knows anything about this research. And I'm so glad that you bring it out, so that the Catholic people can realize that somebody has hijacked their religion. If there was any legitimacy whatsoever in Catholicism ever, it's gone now.
Yeah, and you know what? When you start, and I find that Catholics, former Catholics that find this out, are some of the most outspoken truth seekers there are.
Sure.
And many former Catholic priests, like Richard Bennett, are the same way. But here's what I wanted to mention. When we start talking about your President Abraham Lincoln, and I think every American needs to know this, when he was listening to the intrigues of the war and how the Vatican was involved, he was told this. He was told this by Father Chiniquy and others, that the Pope and his Jesuits have advised, supported, and directed Jeff Davis on the land from the first gunshot at Fort Sumter by the rabid Roman Catholic Beauregard. Now, what I'm getting at is Lincoln understood what was going on. Like you said, he understood the religious ramifications of this war.
Sure.
And he understood and tried to warn people until his death, until he was killed, what was going on. And guess what happens? We are in the same situation now, but worse, because they have gained a bigger foothold than they ever had back then.
Sure.
And so what we need to do is ask these same questions that Lincoln was proposing, and not listen to people like Alex Jones, who tells you that, anybody who looks at this history, it's all twisted. Well, what he's saying is Abraham Lincoln is twisted.
That's what he's saying.
And he isn't, folks.
He doesn't want to know the truth. Alex Jones
is twisted. He's twisted and needs to be exposed.
Absolutely.
Because he will not cover this story, and it has to, a very pertinent story of what is going on today.
Well, I'm just thrilled to death that you're the one taking the initiative to get this done, Greg.
And somebody has to. And I don't know. Like you said, God is the final arbiter. And I think that I've been lucky enough in my days to somehow get on this path of truth and not be misled, because it would be so easy for me to have fallen in the other path And
Oh,
something
me too, Greg.
clicked, and I am so happy. And with that comes no matter what strife, no matter what pain, no matter how you feel alone, you're never alone anymore in this struggle, because I can see not only is God on your side, but I want to be on the side with people like Abraham Lincoln, with others like Samuel Morse, with John Adams, certain people who understood this and were strong enough to speak out.
Right.
And I don't want to be on the side of people like Alex Jones, George Bush, Ron Paul, and every other senator and congressman that has sold us out. And I believe that if we stand together as Americans from both the religious point of view, which you eloquently talked about, and the secular point of view, that even if they succeed, we have won the battle, because we know the truth,
right,
and we will not be deterred. And that's the way I feel about it.
Well, the Scripture says clearly, fear not him who can destroy the body, but rather fear him that can destroy both body and soul in hell. Mm-hmm. And we're not to fear this monster who's about to come and shed our blood. We're going to be killed by our own government, buddy. This Holy Roman Inquisition has now become the driving force behind the United States. The United States, this comes sound outrageous to people that haven't done the research, but I've done the research, both the secular research and the religious research. The United States has literally become the right hand of the Holy Roman Inquisition. And the Bible reveals in Revelation chapter 13 that the United States of America is going to be the very image of the beast. And and the United States is going to cause all the world to worship the first beast, which is Rome. That's the Bible, buddy. You can't argue with the Bible. All you can do is understand it and then agree with it. And I just hate it that we've got to quit.
Listen, I wish we could talk on. We'll do a show together again, because it's a good mix. Thanks for taking over for me.